So, this is part of my other new series, Random Rants. And today's first random rant will be about growing up going to Orange County Public Schools in the not great state of Florida in the city of Orlando. Orange County Public Schools back in the 80s and 90s was a totally different beast. I don't know how it is today. I'm sure much hasn't changed. Well, when I used to be a little boy going to Orange County Public Schools, well, here in the state of Florida, we don't have really any taxes but sales tax and the property tax. There's no state tax, no city tax, and no county tax. So our schools tend to be severely underfunded. When I mean severely, I mean, my God, very underfunded. I remember in the late 80s, when I was a little boy, that the Florida lottery was coming. And Florida's retiree population was very opposed to it. And you're talking about a demographic of people that love to go gambling, but they didn't want to hear in Florida. And it was like that many times before the population shifted and the retirees went to another state. They had opposed to many things that could have brought a lot of money to the state. And to win them over, they said that a percentage of the ticket sales were going to go to the public school systems. Well, fast forward 30 some odd years later, and the public schools here don't see one red cent of that lottery money. Well, going to school in Orange County, I really didn't, notice anything because when you're a kid, you really don't know much about your surroundings. But as an adult, looking back, knowing what I know now, it was very evident that we really didn't have anything in our schools. Number one was lack of computers. Well, the schools I went to were still using late 70s, early 80s Apple II computers well into the mid 90s. The only places you would usually find newer, more powerful computers were in the media center, or aka the library for us in the older generation. And I always remember every teacher complaining that their department needed this and needed that because, let's just say, resources were never available. I remember well into the 90s that a lot of teachers were still using textbooks from the late 70s and early 80s. I remember when I was in child development in high school, we were using mid 70s textbooks. And I remember during the 90s that one school district here in Florida got their hands on brand new 486 computers. Yes, you heard me, 486. I'm talking about 1997, 1998 when Pentium 2 was out. And don't get me started on old schools. Well, the neighborhood I grew up in was a very old neighborhood. All the schools surrounding it were old also. A lot of them were built in the 40s and 50s. Well, as the decades marched on, as they got older, the county kind of neglects its older schools. The priority went first to new schools, then to the old schools. And I remember one particular middle school I went to. I hated my middle school years. What a passion. Well, anyways, the middle school I went to was built in 1926. It was the oldest school in the city. And it was a designated landmark. Well, when something is a designated landmark, it has to go through a committee to get just basic repairs done to it. And that school was falling apart. When I mean falling apart, there were cracks in the foundation. There were rats in the boys and girls locker room beneath the gymnasium. And the gymnasium, when I was there for the full 3 years, was closed down 2 times to get all the asbestos out. Now the school has been transformed to a gleaming magnet school. Over the years, they did additions and did much needed repairs. How they pulled it off, I don't know, because I recall both teachers and administrators fighting just to get a new coat of paint on the walls and the hallways. Then during my high school years, I went to a high school that was not very old. It was built in the early 1950s. But it had its share of problems like overcrowding. The population of the city was exploding, and there were more and more students coming in. Every freshman class was getting exponentially bigger. So, just to give you a example, my freshman class was about 910 students. And over the years, students move, drop out. So by the time I graduated, there were only 540 of us left. The freshman class that came in during my senior year was 1,003 or more. The high school was only built to hold 2,300 students, and we had close to 3,000 students. And, well, it was so bad that a lot of new teachers were brought in, but they didn't get assigned classrooms. They were what they were called the floaters. I called them the nomads. These teachers had to go to a classroom when another teacher was on their planning period or their break/lunch. To give you an example, if I was a floating teacher, and let's say the English teacher in the 600 building was on her planning period, then I would go there and use her classroom as my classroom to teach, say, my third period. Then when third period was over, I might have to go all the way to the 500 building to use the chemistry teacher's classroom while the chemistry teacher is out on their planning period, so I could teach my fourth period class. Now, imagine having to lug all your stuff around, bouncing from classroom to classroom with every class change, just like the students, because you don't have an assigned classroom yet. And that was a problem that a lot of the new teachers were facing. And another issue with my old high school was, of course, with many schools in the county, funding. But what my high school did was to partner up with the beverage companies, mainly Pepsi, and there were soda machines put into the schools along with sodas being sold at the cafeteria. Well, it was providing a good chunk of money for the school so they can use it to fund a lot of programs in the school. Well, my junior year in high school, a group of inspectors from the county came and they saw that the lines for the vending machine and the junk food was longer than the lines for the school cafeteria. Go figure, school cafeteria food was terrible. Well, they decided to put an end to it. Despite what the principal tried to do, they had put timers on the vending machines, and they also prohibited that junk food be sold at the cafeteria. Well, I came to school early enough, so I was able to get my sodas for the day, and I was fine. But then there was a period where the timer kicked in before 7. And let's say you push the button to get a wild cherry Pepsi, and the timer was on. The only thing you got was a freaking Powerade. Powerade was brand new at the time, and they tasted terrible. I would take Gatorade over Powerade any day. Well, then eventually the corporation was able to strong arm the county and the timers were lifted, so we were able to get our junk food back, and we had junk food in the cafeteria again, so we were all cheering. Then, after I graduated high school, the American Pediatric Association, sticking their nose where it don't belong, said that junk food should not be in any of the high schools, and shortly afterwards, all the junk food was taken out of the high school, and they were replaced with flavored water or healthy chips. And like one student told me, long after I graduated, he says, "Man, you were lucky you went in the days when you could have soda and chips. Now it's flavored water and I don't know what the heck they have in the machines. I just rather starve than eat that garbage," he told me. But Orange County's funding woes didn't stop there. Their trade schools were dead last on the list to get anything, and I mean anything. I was going to mid-Florida in my early adult years, and I was in computer electronics, and I remember we were still learning to work on computers with computers from the early to mid 90s. And I remember when Lexmark was going out of business here in Florida, and Lexmark was a terrible printer company, so I could see why they went out of business. The teacher in our class heard about it, and he had to talk with his department head to pull strings to get all the computers from the company to our school. So we finally got brand new computers and brand new monitors for our class. That's how underfunded the trade schools in Orange County are. And finally, for the final part of my rant, Orange County is very hard pressed to cancel school for anything. And when I mean anything, I mean if there was a zombie outbreak, school would still be in session. If there was an asteroid heading to Earth, school will still be in session. If the Battle of Armageddon was happening, school will still be in session. It was a miracle that they shut down during the outbreak of the virus that shall not be named. And guess who would have to be going to school? Yes, yours truly, because to quote Jeannie from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, if blood was coming out of my eyes, I would still be going to school. In my household, the rule was if you didn't have a fever, you were going to school. If you had strep throat and lost your voice, you didn't have a fever, you were going to school. If you were shot full of holes, if you didn't have a fever, you were going to school. During the 80s and the 90s, the weather in Florida was quite calm when it came to hurricanes. We really hadn't had a hurricane in a very long time when I was going to school. We had a few threats and maybe one or two tropical storms that hit. There was Hurricane Andrew, but I lived in Orlando, and Orlando was not affected at all when Andrew plowed through South Florida. Then in 95, Hurricane Aaron came through here, but it was such a weak hurricane that it was really a joke. And it happened during the summer, so school was not in session yet. But there was one year that a weak tropical storm had come through Florida, and I remember looking at the news and seeing the ticker beneath the television screen to see if Orange County was canceled. Of course, all the counties surrounding Orange had canceled their school except for who? Orange County. And guess who had to go to school? I did. And let's just say school was empty that day. I was just one of the handful of students that was there. We didn't do the work that day. All we did was just watch movies. But, the thing was that the county didn't cancel. Luckily, when Tropical Storm Jerry hit, my mother was having surgery and said I didn't have to go to school because she wanted to make sure I was at the hospital with her for her surgery. So I got lucky that day. But guess what? Orange County did not cancel school that day, but all the surrounding counties did. And there were a couple times that Orange County did kind of lapse and follow the other county leads to cancel class when there was a major threat of storms hitting here. Fortunately, at the time, those storms veered north at the very last second, but it made the county even more resolute and take a harder stance on canceling classes during an impending storm. And later generations that went to Orange County Public Schools will tell you also that Orange County is hard pressed to cancel schools for anything. Well, this is the end of my first ever random rants. There will be more random rants video to come. Like and subscribe. The end.